My son and his family were leaving on a weekend road trip on a Friday afternoon when my grandson clung to me and pouted, begging me to take good care of his cat. I laughed and told him to go have fun, and I'll make sure everything is okay after. Restocking the cat's food and cleaning out the litter box. A fine layer of dust swirled off the countertop, so I picked up a cloth and began cleaning it. The photo album was sitting on the coffee table in the living room, and I opened it without thinking, expecting to see pictures of my grandson, but instead it looked more like a travel journal, with the backgrounds in each picture the two individuals. In each picture stayed the same despite the variety of mountains, islands, grasslands, and endless deserts, a man and a woman with silver hair who were full of life and stood together in every frame. Holding each other close, their smiles bright and unburdened from Switzerland to UND-drenched beaches to rolling hills. In the most recent picture, they were standing in front of a waterfall that gushed from the clouds in a sheer white ribbon. Their fingers linked, one in a blue shirt, and there were plains and endless deserts throughout the country in all 4 seasons. My fingers trembled so much that I almost dropped the book. Other in a matching blue dress. The rocky cliffs and misty gorge behind them only added to their ethereal appearance, giving the impression that they were untouchable by time. Even with the fine lines on their faces, they still looked like the ideal couple. A handwritten note. On the back of the picture read, Damon and Alice, September. The handwriting I recognized in 2023 was that of Damon, my husband of over 40 years, and Alice, his first love, whom he had never been allowed to marry. I recall the blue shirt from last September, when I carefully ironed each of them before Damon departed for an out-of-town seminar. His shirts, including this one, were always clean and tidy. As I turned through more pages, I noticed that each picture had a date, one for each year, and an uninterrupted timeline that went back decades. Occasionally, there were handwritten notes on the back of the poems, brief thoughts, and other lines written in Damon's distinctive script. The oldest photo at the bottom had yellowed with time, and the years pressing down on it like a physical weight made the two of them appear so young. On the back, he wrote, "If one day we stand in the snow together, then in this life we have already grown old side by side." I turned the pages faster, my vision blurring. The ink had faded by November 2005, but the strokes were still bold and forceful, like a sword cutting through water. Yes, from youth to old age, from dark hair to silver strands, how could they not be regarded as lifelong companions? But my spouse is so ridiculous. A fire started inside my chest, burning through my organs with such ferocity that Damon, a 65-year-old medical expert who was well respected, spent a whole month each year roaming the world with his first love instead of attending academic conferences. I wanted to call Damon right then and there to demand an explanation from him and make him tell me why he had kept this from me for 25 years, but it hurt to breathe, and it felt like a blast of cold air had blown through me, leaving my limbs numb and my eyes too heavy to keep open. As soon as I grabbed my phone, my strength failed me. My fingers became cold, and tears fell to the ground like a broken string of pearls. Outside, the sun set below the horizon, and the world was abruptly plunged into darkness. I collapsed onto the ground, staring blankly into space as I struggled to think how my life had turned out. As the night grew darker, Damon called repeatedly to tell me to come home. I packed the photo album into my bag and started to walk slowly. The 10-minute drive turned into 30 minutes. When I finally got there, Damon was typing away at his desk, intent on his work. When he saw me, he looked up with the same unshakable focus that he had always had, even in old age. His stance was straight, and his motions were purposeful and exact. "What took you so long? What were you so busy with?" Dinner wasn't ready yet, so I looked at the empty dining table when I said, "If I don't cook, will you never think to do it yourself?" He raised an eyebrow, surprised. "What's gotten into your bad mood? Has our son upset you again? If you're not feeling up to it, we can eat out. I'll make a reservation." He shut down his laptop. I watched him as he moved toward the entrance to change his shoes. He looked at me and said, "Come on, there's no need to cook tonight, let's go." His pleasant demeanor and familiar features were marked by the effects of aging. I asked, "Can you not go?" But he stopped staring at me in surprise. My voice trembled, "Don't go, not just this time, no more trips from now on." His brows wrinkled. "What are you talking about?" "Regarding this, you are aware that instructors at my level are expected to travel for lectures. You are 65 years old, Damon," and my voice was hardly audible above a whisper. "Are you really merely going to give lectures? You don't have to travel any further." Considering that he continued to study me with awe, his tone was disbelieving. "What exactly are you trying to say? Are you accusing me of something? My work excursions are well known, you see the reports, don't you?" Yes, every year when Damon traveled for academic conferences, news pieces were always written about his seminars. Which is why I never questioned him for 25 years. I always assumed that since he was already so busy and worn out, the least I could do was take care of stuff around the house and make sure he had nothing to worry about. After all, marriage is about supporting one another, right? Damon and I had never had a great earth. I had assumed it was love too, but in 40 years of marriage, we had never even had a real quarrel. I looked up and caught his gaze, and for a brief moment, I felt a wave of regret since we had treated each other with respect and had calm companionship. Stumbling over me, I slowly took the album out of my bag and asked, Damon, is this what you find amusing? His eyes widened in surprise, and then he grabbed the album out of my hands. His voice rose sharply, You're going through my things, Julia. After all these years, this is what you've become. I can't believe you're like this, he was. I had seen Damon's back. Flustered, his tone was defensive. Alice and I sure had some feelings when we were young, but now we're just old classmates catching up. Doesn't everyone have the right to remember their youth? What do you think we're capable of at our age, Julia? You're being utterly irrational. The last thing I saw was the young man in his white coat storming out the door, his back stiff with anger, a cold hollow feeling gnawing at him, although I had seen him enter the operating room countless times over the years and spend the late night hunched over his desk writing reports, each one etched with a familiar image. When he came home very late that night, I realized for the first time that Damon and I were engaged in a silent war. The house was silent, the dining table was still dark, and he slammed the door to his study. For the next few days, I stopped cooking and cleaning his clothes. Was prepared for just my supper, and he spent his day quietly, leaving early and coming back late. His filthy clothes were piled high in a basket, and the wrinkled and neglected shirts that had been folded neatly were now put in when my son's family got back from their vacation. Came over for dinner, Grandma, and this is the gift I brought. Back for you and Grandpa. My 7-year-old grandson Neil gave it to me with a smile on his face and in his hair. Thank you, Neil. Finish your meal and go play in your room. My daughter-in-law Monica suggested softly, then turned to me in a hesitant voice, asking, Julia, how have you and Damon been? I looked down, my fork running mechanically through my food, and my son Lucas couldn't contain himself anymore. What's going on with you, Mom? Voice was filled with obvious frustration. Yes, that album was purposefully left at our house, and he went on without realizing that the sting was saying, You're really making a big deal out of this, Mom, why care about something like this? Dad's done so much for our family, and now he's older. It's normal to reflect on the past. I met Alice, who is sensible and understanding. They're just reminiscing, so why must you be so harsh on them? His voice continued to ramble, but I kept quiet in between his tirades. I stealthily picked up his favorite dish and poured it into the trash while Lucas looked at me. Wide-eyed in shock, Mom, are you crazy? What are you doing? Monica gently pulled at his sleeve, but he was furious and threw his cutlery onto the table. Okay, if you won't even let me eat, then don't ever come look at me again. Following us, or else he rushed out, taking Monica and Neil with him. Neil was still reading in his room when he was suddenly jerked along, his eyes brimming with tears. I couldn't help but think of Lucas when he was Neil's age, lifting his little face to mine and promising to buy me the best things in the world. When he grew up, how people change, even the kids you raise yourself. When Lucas was little, Damon had been so busy with his job that I was the one who looked after him every day. Now that his father had reached the pinnacle of his career, I was the one he trusted the most, able to protect him and provide for him. In the dead of night, I went to the bathroom and noticed Damon crouched in front of the washing machine, staring at the buttons as though he couldn't figure them out. He looked up at me, his lips parted but his words unsaid, and I turned to go back to my room, but he called after me. This was the beginning of his future. FIA, I have no clean clothing to wear, and my clothes are dirty. I shook my head, went over, and clicked the button to start the washing machine, and the water started to run. I apologize, Julia, I've been lying to you for years, and it's my fault. Small now, with the weight of his confession pressing down on him, but you must trust me that I never intended to ruin our family. I stared at him for a while, breathing softly, thinking that perhaps we should part ways. He then snapped his head up, his eyes cloudy and filled with an odd, bitter light. When I confronted Damon, I felt as though a knot in my chest had finally released the fog that had been clouding my thoughts, leaving me surprisingly clear-headed. Damon and I were introduced by mutual friends 5 years apart. At the time, he was a recently graduated medical student, and I was just an average office worker. I knew he had been an A when he told me about Alice. He revealed everything about a 3-year relationship that had ended abruptly because the woman's parents opposed their union. He claimed that everything was behind him and that he was ready to move on, and I believed him. I nodded, and we entered into a marriage that when Damon was still a medical intern 40 years ago, almost all of his time was spent working. He had to help with surgeries, gather research data, work clinical shifts, and put in endless overnight hours, so everything else fell on me. His pay was small at the time, and I didn't dare quit my job, so I worked both during the day and at night. I took care of our young child and his sick mother, and even in her last days, I sat by her bedside and held her hand while she took her last breath. I can still recall the moment Damon came home from the hospital, his hands shaking as he took mine. Julia. I don't know what I would do alone. I thought that the difficulties were over and that we would have a stable future together when his career took off, but in the year that I turned 60 and Damon turned 65, we finally came to an end before I retired. I was an accountant who had dedicated my entire life to analyzing and reconciling financial data. Countless accounts, but ultimately, the final balance sheet I ever oversaw was the distribution of assets from my 40-year marriage. I left Damon the divorce papers after I moved into a tiny apartment I owned, and he held them for a while without responding. I told him it was all right, I'll give you a month. When Lucas learned that I had filed for divorce, he bombarded my phone with dozens of messages, all of which blamed me for being impetuous and selfish. After giving it some thought, I threw away a lot of old items that I had held onto for decades, but never really needed, and the moment they were in the trash, I felt a sudden sense of liberation. I was careless and disregarded them all. Maybe my choice had upset him too much. After I moved out, I had a lot of free time after 2 days of rest, and for the first time in 60 years, he never came to visit me. I then booked a flight to Hawaii and spent a whole month by the sea. Without having to budget every cent, breeze carried away the relics of my past. I learned something new, and traveling freely was a true joy. I took pictures of the places I visited, and, following the example of younger people, I uploaded them online. To my surprise, the pictures received a ton of likes, including one from even his comments, "Julia, have fun, stay safe," were appreciated by our mutual acquaintances, who showered us with words of envy for our seemingly unbreakable bond. Damon also sent me texts inquiring about the whereabouts of certain items in the house. I ignored all of his messages, which included pictures of the spaghetti he had tried to make and a reminder to wear sunscreen. For the first time, I experienced no emotions at all, not even the ripple of a single emotion, but when I got back from my trip, I was met by an unexpected guest. When Alice finally found me, I realized something was wrong. Damon had promised to take another trip the next week, but he was still here more than a month later. Was it because he had broken his word to Alice this year that she would travel so far to find me? She sat elegantly. Despite the fact that age had affected her face, she had a gentle smile on her lips, a perfectly fitting outfit, and a demeanor that exuded peaceful elegance. In comparison to her, I must have appeared to be a simple old woman, basic and unadorned, others say. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you," she said, taking a delicate sip of her coffee, and added, "It's a pleasure to finally meet you. That which you can't achieve in your youth will haunt you for a lifetime, and if that unattainable thing is a person, it's no wonder Damon had spent his entire life seeing her as his one true love. Julia, is it? You really don't need to be upset about this, Julia. Damon and I were just keeping a promise we made decades ago, which you might not be aware of. I apologize deeply that you and Damon had a falling out because of me." I didn't answer, and she remained calm and unfazed as she continued to speak in a calm, measured tone. However, during our class reunion in 2005, Damon and I made a vow to travel the world together when we were in college. We realized that we were getting older and that if we didn't start traveling right away, we might never get the chance. She laughed as though amused by her own story, saying, "Isn't it a promise? Made at 20, and we only set out once?" I smiled, repeating her look, and she said, "You came all this way just to sit in front of me and tell me your love story, Julia," with a patient tilt of her head. Marital status is marriage, and love is love, and I refuse to believe that after all these years, you don't comprehend the difference. You may not believe me, but neither Damon nor I ever intended to harm you. Her tone was composed, and her eyes had a faint smile, but beneath that warmth, I sensed something else, almost taunting. I got up, put some money on the table to cover the coffee, and looked her in the eyes. "I'm not sure if marriage," and she finally stopped smiling as I leaned in and lowered my voice a little, "but let me just say that it must have been exhausting to spend your entire life in the shadows." I said evenly, "Love can truly be separate. But I know that you or Damon could have told me the truth from the beginning. It's just an old man we're talking about. If you want him, you can have him." From the other woman to the vintage other woman, you must be glad to finally enter the spotlight. I grinned once more, which explains why you're in such a rush this year. As you mentioned, if you wait any longer, you might not arrive in time. Her face was devoid of color. I turned and left the cafe, and Damon was standing directly outside the glass doors. I retreated just out of his reach, and his voice was strained as he reached for me, his fingers twitching palely at his sides. I said, "Have you signed the divorce papers?" And he opened his mouth as though he looked lost for the first time. "Little Julia," and he muttered, as if he was trying to find the proper words, "this isn't what you think. Do we really have to go through with this? We've spent a lifetime together, and we still have Damon." I interrupted him, my voice filled with silence. Disbelief. "When will you ever take responsibility?" I laughed bitterly. "At 20 because you lacked a backbone and didn't dare confront her parents. As a result, you allowed her to leave you at 40, when you had everything, a family, a career, because you still lacked the guts to be open about what you wanted, and now that you're 65, you're still the similarly, you conceal yourself behind women, holding on to your past and present in the hopes that no one will force you to make a decision, but life doesn't operate that way." He stood frozen, a flash of panic crossing his face, his composure breaking for the first time in 40 years. I saw Damon for who he really was, a man who had never been brave. Damon was willing to fight for anything, and when he finally signed the divorce papers, Lucas lost control and called me, his voice exploding with rage. "Mom, I don't understand what's going through your head. You're old now. Do you seriously want a divorce? You and Dad built this marriage for a lifetime, and you're just throwing it away like it means nothing. And that property division, Dad, has spoiled you too much. Take a look at the numbers yourself. Do you really think it's fair? Dad provided the majority of our family's income. What right do you have to take so much?" I remained composed. "Lucas, you should understand what marital assets mean, and if you carefully consider the first 20 years of your life, who was the one who actually keeping this family together, too, even though I'm 60 years old, isn't that the age at which I should just wait to die?" He choked for a second, then raised his voice, attempting to start another argument. "Yes, you helped this family, but all you did was housework, which anyone could have done if we paid them to do it. Lucas, why are you so callous to me? Your father was the one who betrayed our marriage, and even if he had left with nothing, that would have been his own problem. Instead of wasting time arguing with me, perhaps you should consider your options." I didn't bother listening to his nonsense any longer, I just hung up. "This is when you're so understanding that Aunt Alice marries your father, and whatever money he has left will gain another legal heir, Mom. You're really cold-blooded. Aunt Alice is kind and considerate, and it's not like you're always obsessed with money." Half a month later, I came across a family photo that Lucas had shared on social media. Alice was tucked up against Damon, her hand holding food, and the 5 of them made up the picture of a perfect, happy family. Lucas captioned the photo, "My father is the role model of my life. After half a lifetime, true love still stands by his side." The post went viral very quickly. A few years ago, while traveling in Switzerland, I managed to meet Professor Damon and his wife. Even at the time, I thought they were such a loving couple, what an ideal bond. But as the comment gained endless likes, more and more people started to remember how they had witnessed Damon and Alice together in various locations over the years, and comment after comment helped to piece together the same story I had discovered in that album. Before long, the epic love story between Damon and Alice was making the rounds, and people referred to them as the real life, as they grew old together. I was momentarily stunned when Lucas sent me a message that said, "Look, you threw this marriage away with your own hands. Now the whole world is celebrating Dad and Aunt Alice." I then typed back, "Should I post my divorce certificate too?" To see how the public would respond when they learned that this supposedly legendary romance was truly a decades-long affair. Lucas never responded again, and of course I never put the divorce decree online for one reason: after 40 years of marriage, I didn't want to cut off Damon's retreat, and for another, because I was only 6 years old, and if I looked after myself, I still had many years to enjoy life's pleasures are ahead of me, and I wasn't going to spend time on unworthy people and things when I was living a tranquil existence. However, after I left, Alice moved in with Damon, and at first, everything appeared perfect. When Lucas was reunited with his first love, he thought Alice was classy and well-behaved. Neil even loved her and called her grandma in his charming little voice, but a household needs to be managed, and Alice, who was used to a comfortable life, wasn't the type of woman who did housework, so Lucas quickly hired a maid that took care of the cleaning problem, but Neil's daily school drop-offs and pickups still needed to be taken care of. Monica didn't trust Nanny with that, so Lucas turned to Alice, who smiled and graciously agreed, telling them they could concentrate on their work without worrying. Lucas was incredibly appreciative of Alice, saying, "You're the best, you're nothing like my mother, you're usually so kind and sympathetic," but after only a few days, Alice almost lost Neil. She had taken him to the mall after school, becoming sidetracked while perusing a clothes store, and in a matter of minutes, Neil had disappeared. Panicked, she called. Fortunately, after a desperate search by security and the police, he was discovered on a different floor unharmed. Alice was shaken and furious, and she reprimanded Neil the moment she saw him. Didn't I tell you to wait inside the store? I was only trying on a couple of outfits. Why did you run off? She asked, and Monica arrived just in time to see the scene. Alice didn't say anything, and her face was inscrutable, but as soon as they came home, she insisted that Lucas come to me and apologize. At first, Lucas refused, saying that Alice had never had children and that it was only an accident. She will be more careful the next time, but that evening, Damon contacted Lucas. Quietly. Given that Alice had been feeling ill and that her back hurt from all the running about and that she was weary, maybe it would be better to come up with a different plan for Neil's school runs. Monica laughed icily and quickly pulled Lucas over to my house to tell Mom that I was mistaken earlier. I was angry at the time and said some inappropriate things, so don't take it personally. Lucas kept his head down, and his tone was abnormally quiet. He made an embarrassed laugh and then allowed his gaze to roam around my apartment, checking that he eventually fell on my brand new massage chair. Mom. I don't mean to be critical. But you've learned how to enjoy life after the divorce. I've seen advertisements for this chair, which costs at least $20,000. You certainly didn't hold back. I retaliated with his own words, saying that since I stole so much money from your father, wouldn't it be a waste not to spend it as best he could, rubbing his nose and appearing momentarily sheepish. Come on, Mom, you already got rid of your husband. Are you going to get rid of your son as well? Neil is your grandson, and I know you wouldn't just ignore him. Monica timed her voice in a way that was sincere, and Julia Lucas was out of we all know how much you've done for our family. So I've already reprimanded him. Neil's accident truly worried me, and I can't trust anybody to take care of him anymore, so could you please weekdays, but if you need someone to watch Neil on the weekends, you can bring him over for eye-opening piano lessons because when you're really going all out, I bought a piano a few days ago and said, don't worry, it's being delivered this afternoon. He frowned and opened his mouth to speak, but Monica quickly pinched his arm and grinned. Julia. It's great that you're pursuing new interests. I'm so happy for you. Don't worry about Neil, I'll figure something out. Months later, I received more information about Damon, this time from Monica. When she brought Neil over, her face was unreadable as although I've already instructed Lucas to make it clear to his father that we strongly disagree, she casually mentioned that Alice is getting more and more demanding, has completely taken over the house, rearranging everything beyond recognition, and is now pressuring Damon to get married. He gave me a knowing look. Disagreed with the marriage because, when you were around, we only had to concentrate on our jobs and didn't have to worry about anything at home. However, now that we're both busy all day, we have to hire a nanny for Neil, and Lucas keeps getting dragged into doing Alice's chores. She smirked and added in a low voice, and from what I understand, Damon hasn't decided to wed her yet. They've been fighting a lot, and it seems like the old man still has some common sense. Dating is one thing, but marriage is quite another. I couldn't help but laugh and just resumed slicing fruit for Neil because everyone has their own viewpoint and interests at stake when they conflict. Decisions naturally diverge, so I wasn't sure why Damon was hesitant to marry Alice, but it made perfect sense that Lucas and Monica were opposed, especially in light of what had happened with Neil. Alice had nearly lost their child, but instead of taking responsibility, she blamed him for running off. No daughter-in-law would take that lightly, but what really not only was Damon's house in disarray, but Damon and Alice had returned to the spotlight, this time for all the wrong reasons. And unlike before, when they were surrounded by admiration and praise, skepticism was rampant. I never imagined seeing Damon again. Not like this again, lying in a hospital bed, weak and exhausted, his once peppered hair now entirely white. The scandal had swept like wildfire, devouring every last bit of the respect he and Alice had once shared. It all began with a single sentimental remark from an old classmate beneath a news post, and Professor Damon and Miss Alice were the one comment drove the internet into a frenzy, and interested netizens delved deeper, questioning the timeline. It's unfortunate that the golden pair of our university days succumbed to reality and parted ways. At a reunion a few years ago, we all felt bad for them, and now they're back together. The truth gradually came to light, the so-called lifetime love was actually a decades-long affair between two married people, not a tale of first love that endured through the years. Some attempted to defend this, arguing that first love is strong even after decades apart and that their hearts still longed for one another. If this isn't true love, what is? But other people saw through the romanticized illusion, so if first love is the only true love, am I the only one who feels sorry for Damon's wife? Then came the most brutal reality of all. After years of pictures of them traveling together, people shared their old classmates' opinions, even at recent reunions, that we were still each married to someone else. Thus, this was only a decades-long affair. As gossip is human nature, the instant that remark was made, the floodgates opened, and Medicon pieced together the timeline by combining history, witness accounts, and the very travel documents that had previously been the internet turned against them. Not the renowned Professor Damon, who was exposed for a 40-year affair. Alice's claim that this was a first love is insulting to the term. It was a planned, decades-long home wrecking. Please don't ruin the concept of first love for the rest of us. Can be unforgettable, but it shouldn't fade, and in that sense, the fairy tale love story that Damon and Alice had meticulously. Lucas contacted me shortly after he had curated his shattered, tight voice, Mom and Dad. After a heated argument with Alice, he passed out and is now in the hospital, unable to move his mother. I didn't intend to attend, but I felt sorry for him because you were married for 40 years. At the very least, come see him. Ultimately, I did it out of love and compassion, but more as a last courtesy to. And when I arrived, Damon, an old friend I had walked with for decades, had a light in his eyes that it almost seemed like a relief. Julie, but you came anyhow, so I thought that was nice. As I stood here, I would have some sort of nostalgia or angst. However, all I sensed was distance, as though he were a stranger I had known in a previous life. He extended a quivering hand. Hawaii was lovely, wasn't it? It's a shame I didn't learn to play the piano, Lucas told me. If I get better, can you play for me? I would really love to watch the sunset with you if I could, but I couldn't be there. I scowled. Don't turn me away just yet. He coughed violently before I could say anything, and his body was feeble. Helly, allow me to say this. I've been clinging to these words for days. Don't say them now because I might never get the chance. I keep seeing you around the home since you departed, like you never truly departed. I know I've harmed you, and I don't deserve your pardon, but that day when you asked if I could stay if I hadn't argued with you, if I had just woken up, is still in my mind. A sudden, intense agony twisted in my chest, and I wondered if we would still be together today. Back in that dimly lit room, sitting on the floor and crying by myself in the eerie quiet, but I shook my head for a brief while. If you had genuinely loved me, Damon, you wouldn't have changed if my voice had been steady. You're a fickle person. You claim to regret it, but in reality, you're flawless. You wouldn't have traveled with Alice for decades now. The untouchable white moonlight has been reduced to a simple dinner table bread, and now you are always like that. I seemed more valuable to you since I was the one who left first. His breath caught as his lips parted, pursuing what you can't have and never appreciating what's in front of you. He let out a long sigh, his eyes clouded with self-mockery, as though the words had physically hit him. But Julia, after 40 years of dating, are you claiming that you don't feel any kind of attachment? I laughed quietly and solemnly. Can't we go back? Damon, please, can you go back in time? Can you return my 40 years? Why should I be forced to stay in a marriage based on betrayal? Am I really that low? That I ought to be appreciative of whatever leftovers I was given. He laughed loudly, his voice almost audible above a whisper. I have dedicated my entire life to helping others, but ultimately I was unable to save myself, and now that I have nothing left, I have no choice but to depart. Lucas and Monica were standing outside when I pushed open the hospital room door. Lucas paused before yelling. He leaned out as though to stop me, Mom, but I moved aside, and Monica kissed me. Her face was filled with unreadable remorse, sadness, and sympathy. I left the hospital without waiting to find out, passing them as I went down the hallway and out into the open. For the first time in decades, I inhaled deeply, and the sky seemed to go on forever. After I eventually found out what had sparked Damon and Alice's final heated quarrel, Alice paid me a final visit. She appeared as elegant and well-groomed as previously, with her attire perfectly put together, but this time the light penetrated. A heavy veil of hazy sadness had replaced her eyes, and she shoved Julia's hands were shaking a little when she brought me her cup of coffee. You won her over. Her lips formed a sour grin, but the last time I saw her, her face was incredibly pale. I told you that you were in Damon's marriage, but I was in love with him. Now that I realize how foolish I was, Julie, I'm going after watching. She quietly picked up my coffee and took a few slow, deliberate swallows before letting out a breath. Do you know why Damon and I got into a fight? He said shakily before continuing as though the words had been suppressed for too long. I am being tormented by the internet, which calls me shameless and claims that I have lived my entire life as the other woman's elderly. I pleaded with the idiot, who never learns to respect himself, and assured him that I would no longer pressure him to marry me. All I asked for, he only needed to post a single statement on the internet stating that you two had divorced 25 years prior. Sentence why my name could have been cleared with just that, but he refused, preferring to let himself be destroyed and watch me drag myself through the muck rather than inform the considering that your marriage ended decades ago. I nearly burst out laughing since I wanted to be honest with her. Ash had been a mistress all her life and deserved the taunts, but I swallowed them back down once they got stuck in my throat. Instead, I remarked in a low voice, if you think about it, you only lost your love, I lost There is no winning or losing here. Alice left me all my life, but Damon survived the accident, and his body grew. He became weaker after all of this upheaval, and his memory quickly deteriorated. The physicians determined that he had Alzheimer's. Built a flawless medical profession throughout his life, and as he enters his twilight years, waves of students have come to. Teams of renowned physicians visited him and alternately examined him. But it didn't matter because he was no longer able to. I pushed myself into my piano lessons, and my teacher commended me for being able to recognize people he could no longer recall. When I uploaded, I was able to perform a whole piece from beginning to end, demonstrating my extraordinary dedication to studying. A video on the internet that suddenly went viral. I also began traveling by myself, and nevertheless, I felt my heart leap with excitement as I boarded a plane while standing in front of the world's biggest wonders. I was traveling to France to view the Eiffel Tower when I received a message from my kid. In the video, Damon was seen sitting in a wheelchair with big glasses on, looking carefully at the phone screen. It was my piano. He often watched the film of Maria Daoud despite his deteriorating memory. And I didn't feel sorry or happy when I watched him cry as they cascaded down his aged cheeks like a child's. Felt far away, as though there was a wide and lovely world from a previous lifetime, whereas the man who had been for 40 years, a young woman close to me, seemed to be nothing more than a fantasy that had long since faded. Grinned and gave me a warm greeting, but I returned the smile. Madam, I was only 60 and I could yet start a new life at 60.